Hi, Peppermint Patty group. So we're back for another lesson, but this lesson is going to be just a little different than what we've done before. We're still going to do a word work lesson. We're going to do an analogy chart like we've done before, and we're still going to read a book together. But what's going to be a little different is I'm not going to pop in as many times while you're reading the book, and that's going to give you a little bit of a chance to read the book without me kind of stopping you or interrupting you. And then at the end of our book, I'm going to come back on and kind of show you and model for you what I want you to do when you go back to Seesaw. And we'll talk more about that when we get there, okay? So I just want to give you a heads up that it's going to be a little different, but we'll talk more about what that looks like in a little bit, okay? So let's get started with our word work lesson, our analogy chart. I'm not going to pop in. I'm just going to let the chart kind of show you what it needs to look like. So make sure that when it pops up that you pause the video, grab a board, grab a piece of paper, and make sure that you draw that chart and write those two words on the top so you'll be ready for our lesson, okay? All right, let's get started. Hi guys. All right, so let's get started with our analogy chart. So remember, that's where we're going to work with two different hunks and chunks, or maybe even like our silent E that we've worked with before. And we're going to see what sound do we hear in those words and where do we think it would go. So what word would it match up with? So what we're going to work on today, and hopefully you've already drawn this chart and you've already written these words, but we are going to work with that E-A hunk and chunk because it can actually make not just one, but two different sounds. So I want you to underline, if you haven't done this yet, I want you to underline that E-A in both of our words. So go ahead and do that real quick. Underline the E-A in this word and in that word. And in this word, the EA is going to make that E sound, just like we've practiced before in our whole group meeting with our phonics stance, where we take the scaredy cat E, we take the scaredy cat A, we put them together, and what do they say? E. So in this word, it's going to say the E, that long E sound, long and strong E sound. So this word is mean. But in this word, it's going to make the short E sound, the eh sound. So in this word, it's ed, head. So it can make the long and strong E sound, or it can make that short E sound, eh. So I'm gonna give you some words and we're gonna look and see, can we figure out what sound is it making, where is it gonna go, okay? All right, let's start with the word steam. So remember, don't write anything yet, just kind of listen to the word. I'm gonna put it in a sentence and then we'll figure out where it goes together, okay? So our word is steam. Like, I put the kettle on the stove and some steam came out. Everybody say steam. Good. All right, so what do you guys think? Do you think it makes that long and strong E sound or the short eh E sound? Steam. It makes the long and strong E sound. So is it going to go under een or ed? What do you think? It's going to go under mean. Good. So let's stretch that out. I hear a blend at the beginning of that word. What blend do you hear? What two letters do you hear that we're blending together and kind of saying them really fast at the same time? St. Good. Hopefully you said that. S-T sound. And then we hear that hunk and chunk, right? Steam. And what do we hear at the end? Steam. Good. That M sound. All right. So hopefully you have this written, and when you do, go ahead and underline that EA so we know where that hunk and chunk is in that word. All right. You ready for our next word? All right. Our next word is bread. Bread. So don't write it yet. Like, I got a slice of bread to make some toast. Bread. Everybody say bread. Good. So what do you guys hear? Do you hear the long and strong E sound, or do you hear the short E sound? Bread. We hear the short E sound, like ed. Good. So we're going to put it under the word head. So let's stretch it out. I hear another blend at the beginning of that word. So we take two letters and we kind of blend those sounds together. So listen. Brr. What two letters do we hear? Good. That B R. And then we hear our br, We hear what hunk and chunk? E, A. Very good. And what do we hear at the end? Bread. The D sound. Very good. So go ahead and make sure that you have that written, and don't forget to underline that E, A, hunk and chunk, where it makes that sound. All right, here's our next word. Our next word is spread. Spread. Like I went to spread the blankets out on my bed. Everybody say spread. Good. All right, now this one, what sound does it make? Does it make that short E sound, or does it make the long and strong E sound? Spread. The short E sound. Good. So we're going to write it under our other short E sound. So remember, it's still the same hunk and chunk, just making two different sounds. So let's stretch it out. So this one's a little bit trickier because there's actually 3 letters that we're blending together. So listen again. Spur, spur. What do you hear? Spur. We hear S, sp, P, spur. R, spur. Good. That's still a blend, but it just has 3 letters instead of 2. Very good. All right, and then what sound do we hear after that? Spread. We hear that short E sound. So I'm just going to write E, right? Because it's a short E sound, right? No. Hopefully you said no, Miss Bale. You're being silly. We're working with that hunk and chunk EA, right? So I can't forget that A. That A is silent, but I can't forget it. It's still part of that word. And then what do I hear at the end? Spread. The D sound. Good. And then don't forget, once you get that word written, underline that EA hunk and chunk so you remember where it makes that sound. All right. You ready for our next one? All right, our next word is cleaned. Cleaned. Like I cleaned my room really well. Everybody say cleaned. Good. All right, so what do you guys hear? Do you hear the the short E sound, or the long and strong E sound? The long and strong E sound. Good. Cleaned. So where are we going to put it? Are we going to put it under mean or head? Mean. Good, because mean makes that E sound too. So let's stretch it out. So let's listen. I hear another blend. Cool. What 2 letters go at the beginning of cleaned? C-L. Very good. Then we hear our what? Our hunk and chunk. Cleaned. We hear that E-A hunk and chunk. And then we hear, this is where it gets a little tricky. So you really have to stretch it out to make sure you get all those letters. We have cleaned. What do we hear before we hear that D sound at the end? Cleaned. We hear that in. Very good. And then I'm just going to write D, right? No, I'm not just going to write D because that's actually a hunk and chunk at the end that we've talked about before. Now, we haven't done it with our whole group, with the whole class, but it is a hunk and chunk that we're going to do in our phonics dance eventually. We'll get to it eventually. But for now, let's talk about cleaned. One of the sounds that ED hunk and chunk can make is that D sound. So just like in this word, cleaned, one of the sounds it can make is just D, just the D sound. But there's actually that silent E. So that's actually a hunk and chunk, E-D, and it makes that D sound. It can also make the T sound or the ed sound, but in this case it's just the D sound. And then don't forget, underline that hunk and chunk, that EA. Very good, you guys. All right, let's do another one. Our next word is dread. Dread. That's kind of a funny word, so listen to it in a sentence so you know what it means. I really was going to dread having to sing in front of a bunch of people. That means like I really didn't want to. I really wasn't looking forward to it because I didn't want to do it, or I was nervous about it. So everybody say dread. Good. And I would be really nervous to sing in front of a bunch of people because you've heard Miss Bale sing and it's not pretty. So anyway, let's get started. Let's do our word dread. So let's stretch it out. So what sound do we hear in the middle of dread? Do we hear that long and strong E sound, or do we hear the short E sound? Good. We hear that short E sound. Ed. So let's stretch it out. I hear another blend. What do we hear? Dr. Dr. We hear that D-R. Good. And then we hear ed. We hear the hunk and chunk. E-A. And then what do we hear at the end? Dread. The D sound. Very good. And don't forget to underline that E-A, hunk and chunk, okay? All right. And then we've got one more word. Our last word is preacher. Preacher. Like my preacher gets up and preaches every Sunday morning. Everybody say preacher. Good. So what do we hear? Do we hear the eh sound, the short E sound, or the long and strong E sound? Preacher. The long and strong E sound. Good. So we're going to put that under the word "ing" because it has that same sound with that hunk and chunk. So let's stretch it out. Again, I hear another blend. Preacher. What blend do we hear? What two letters? P-R. Good. Pr. Then we hear that hunk and chunk that we've been working with, right? Preacher. I can't just write the E because it's that hunk and chunk. That A is silent. We don't say it, but it's still there. Then I hear another hunk and chunk. You ready? Preacher. Preach. What two letters make the ch sound? Ch. That C-H hunk and chunk. Good. And then I hear another hunk and chunk at the end. Preacher. E-R-R at the end of a word, just like in this one, right? So what hunk and chunk do we hear? E-R, very good. But we're gonna underline that E-A because that's the hunk and chunk that we're working with today, okay? All right, so let's go back over the two sounds that E-A hunk and chunk can make. You ready? The first one is that, what sound? The long and strong E sound, and the second one is the short E sound, that eh sound. Very good, you guys. So don't forget, when you guys are stretching out words, especially when you get to like really big words, a really good strategy for you all to use is that chunky monkey strategy. And that's exactly why we're doing this, so you all know if I'm stretching out a word and I get to that word and I see E-A together, then I'm going to try both of those sounds and see if that helps me figure it out, okay? You guys did awesome, and let's go ahead and get started with our book, okay? All right, so let's get started with our book called The Princess and the Pea. And this is actually a fairy tale, so you may have heard this story before. And if you have, that's wonderful. Maybe you'll learn something new, but if you haven't, then I think you're really gonna enjoy this story. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pop in just one time. Like I said before, I'm not gonna interrupt you as much with your reading, but once you're finished reading, then I'm gonna pop up and kind of show you and model for you what I want you to do when you go to Seesaw. Because we're gonna practice learning more about a vocabulary word that you're going to read in our story, okay? So this story is The Princess and the Pea. And this is a fairy tale about a prince who travels all over the world, and he's looking for a princess to marry. And one day, a young woman comes to the castle, and she says she's a princess, but the queen isn't so sure. She wants to be sure that she really is a princess. So we're going to read to find out how the queen figures out, is she really a princess? So I hope you enjoy the book, and then we will talk about our vocabulary word at the end when you're finished. So enjoy. Okay, guys, so I hope you're enjoying the story so far. But one thing that I want us to work on, and we've talked about it before, is making sure that we read with expression. Because if we don't, and we read like a robot and we read like this, if I read to you all like that, would that be very interesting for you all? No, it would be really what? Boring. And we do not want to be boring when we read. Reading is so much fun, and if we read with expression, especially like if I'm reading to you all, then you're going to enjoy it a lot more. If I don't, then you're not going to enjoy it as much, and we want to enjoy when we read. So reading with expression is very important. So that's what we're going to practice, okay? So if you look at these 2 pages, this gives us a really good chance to practice expression, because we not only want to make our voice go up and down and sound excited when there's an exclamation point, or make our voice go up when we see a question mark, but we also want our voice to match the characters in the story. So if the princess is talking, am I going to make my voice really deep like this? No, because more than likely the princess is not going to talk like that. If the queen is talking, am I going to make my voice go like that? No, it's not going to sound like that. You're going to change your voice, and you want it to sound like you think the queen would sound, or the princess would sound, or even the prince, okay? So I'm going to kind of show you how I would read these 2 pages and show you how I'm going to change my voice to match how I think those characters would sound. And then I'm going to have you pause it and practice it on your own, okay? All right, so just listen. You can kind of follow along with me as I read. The next morning, the princess went into the breakfast room. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," said the prince. "I hope you slept well," said the queen. "I'm sorry to tell you that I slept very poorly," said the princess. "I tossed and turned all night long. There was something very hard and lumpy in my bed," she told them. "I am black and blue all over." So do you see how I made my voice kind of deeper when the prince was talking, and I made my voice go up when the princess was talking, and then when the queen was talking, I made my voice sound very like how I think a queen would sound, very I'm not sure how to describe it, but how I think a queen would sound. So that's what I want you to do. Pause the video, and I want you to practice reading this how you think the characters would sound, okay? And then you can start it back up and finish the book. All right, guys, so let's talk about what you're going to do when you go to Seesaw. So we're going to work on our vocabulary. And vocabulary is just a big word that means words that you may not understand what they mean. So maybe you can read the word and you can sound it out, but you don't know what the word means. So that's what we're going to practice. We're going to pull a word each week from our books, and we're gonna learn what that word means. And we're gonna do this in just a second, but you're gonna show me that you understand what that word means with our organizer. So we'll talk about this in just a second, but I wanted to give you a heads up that we're gonna do this every week. So I wanted to focus on this week, but in all of our other lessons that you do for me, while we're doing virtual learning, you are gonna do a vocabulary organizer like this, instead of a sight word, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. So on, let me look and make sure I have the right page. So on page 8, and you'll see it pop up here in just a second. On page 8, there is a word right here. And this word is a big word that you probably could stretch it out, and you know what that word says. It says shelter. We see the SH, sh. We see the ER hunk and chunk at the end, so you could probably stretch that out and know what that word says. But you may not know what that word means. If you do, wonderful. But if you don't, then we're going to learn what that word means. So we talked about before context clues. And context clues is where if I don't know what a word means, I want to use the picture. I want to use the words that are around that word to see if I can figure out what that word means. Because sometimes we're not going to know what a word means, and that's okay. So we got to figure out what can we do to figure that out on our own. So when I look at this page and I read the word shelter and I read that little group of sentences, that paragraph, I see it says, "Could you please give me shelter until the storm passes?" The young woman asked the king. "I am a princess. I have been traveling and I've lost my way." So that tells me when I read, because the picture doesn't really help me much. I don't really understand what the word shelter means just from the picture. But if I read the rest of that, the words around the word shelter, like what I just read, then it makes me think that there's a storm and she needs a place to stay. So that tells me that a shelter is a place for somebody to stay and a place for somebody to stay safe. And so that helps me figure out what that word means, the word shelter. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this word and I'm going to model for you, and then you're going to go back to Seesaw and you're going to do the same thing when you get to Seesaw. Now, I'm not going to do this for you every week. You're going to do this on your own after this week, but at least for this week, I'm going to kind of show you how to do this, okay? So I like to call this my vocabulary organizer. So it just helps me understand my word a little bit better. I also like to call it a 4-square organizer because it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 squares. So I might call it a vocabulary organizer, or I might even call it a 4-square organizer. It's the same thing. So I put our word shelter right in the middle of that box. So that's what you're going to do when you go to Seesaw. And I went ahead and drew my picture because I wanted to show you that I took up this whole space and I added a lot of detail to my picture. And I showed the word shelter in an illustration by drawing a home. And I even added the detail of drawing me inside of the home, inside of the shelter. And I even drew the clouds and the lightning in the sky to show that I'm safe from the weather. And so that shows what a shelter is. It's a place you can stay safe, especially from bad weather. So everybody's going to draw a picture of the word shelter in that first box. In the second box, it says what my word means. So that's basically the definition or what the word means. So when I think about the word shelter, I think of it's a place that I can stay safe from bad weather. So that's what I'm going to write up in this box. So I'm going to say a place to stay safe from bad weather. And really, it doesn't even have to be just from bad weather. It could just be a place to keep you safe. So there's my definition. And then here I want to put my word in a sentence. So when I think about putting my word in a sentence, I want to make sure that I show that what the word means in that sentence. So I could say like, my shelter keeps me safe from storms. So I'm going to write my shelter keeps me safe from storms. Very good. And you don't have to write a sentence that tells what it means, but I just chose to do that. You could just say, my shelter is a home. My shelter is my apartment. You could just say something like that, but I just chose to write a sentence that still kind of tells what it means. And then you always want to underline the vocabulary word that you're working with, okay? So I've got my picture, I've got my definition, what my word means, I've got my word in a sentence, and then the last thing we're going to do, this is a big word. You ready for it? This word says synonym. So everybody say synonym. Good. Synonym just means words that are the same. So words that mean the same thing. So for example, if I gave you the word big, Well, what are some other words that would also mean big? Like large, gigantic, huge, right? Those all would mean the same thing as big. Those are all synonyms because they all mean the same thing. So what you're going to do over here in this last square is you're going to give me synonyms or examples. So words that mean the same thing or examples of your word. So when I think of examples or synonyms of the word shelter, I think of a house. That's a really good example, and that's what I drew in my picture. I think of an apartment. An apartment is a great shelter to keep you safe. And I also think of an animal shelter, like the Humane Society or a place like that where animals can go to be safe. So I think of an animal shelter. So I want you to come up with at least 2 or 3 examples or synonyms of your word each time, okay? So let's take a look again what we did with our vocabulary organizer. So we wrote our word in the middle, our vocabulary word. We drew a picture of it. I gave the definition, so I said what my word means. I put my word in a sentence, and I gave synonyms or words that mean the same or examples of my word. So that's what you're going to do when you go back to Seesaw. It's okay this week if yours looks a little similar to mine, okay? Try to make your sentence different than mine, but it's okay if the rest of it looks kind of similar, okay? But what we're going to do is we're going to do this every single week, all right? You're going to do this every week with our book, and I'm going to choose a word that I want you to see if you can figure out what it means. Sometimes with a literature book, like what we read today, a make-believe book, fiction book, you're going to have to use context clues. You're going to have to use the picture, the words to figure out what it means. But if we read like a nonfiction book, then you might be able to flip back to the glossary and it'll tell you what it means. And then we're going to fill in this to show that we understand that, okay? So hopefully this helped you. And what you're going to do now is you're going to head back to Seesaw, do this, and then turn it into me, okay? You guys did awesome this week, and I can't wait to see all these great vocabulary organizers.